and video recording of the webinar by email within the next few days. And during the webinar, if you have any questions, please type them into the GoToWebinar questions box, and we will get to them towards the end of the webinar and try to answer as many as we can. A little bit about iBwave. We are the worldwide standard for in-building network design and documentation. We are the technology leader, adapting quickly to dynamic and rapidly growing in-building wireless industry. And we are trusted by over 700 customers worldwide. And now I would like to introduce our speaker today. Our speaker is John Drucker. He's the product manager for iBwave Unity, our project management collaboration solution. John has been in the IT industry for over 15 years. He has held roles in small, medium, and large enterprises in companies such as SAP. He has quite a bit of IT project management experience and is currently focusing his efforts on iBwave Unity that helps companies in the wireless space execute their projects with greater ease and accuracy. So now, without further ado, I would like to pass the mic over to John, who can get us started.
Thank you very much, Amna. Good day, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to join in to this webinar. I hope it will be as enlightening for you as it was for me to research it. I would like to go through the agenda very quickly, and then we'll jump right into the subject matter. I'm going to cover a bit about the elements that make project management so difficult, particularly in our space, in the wireless network deployment space. It's a very unique and difficult challenge that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. After that, I'm going to go into some of the numbers that kind of show where the problems lie and how things can get out of control in a difficult, complex project based on some feedback that was taken in multiple surveys. After that, I'm going to present a couple of case studies, one that's very near and dear to me in my own city, the Montreal Super Hospital. And then on the other end of it, a small one about a small company that did some consulting. And they ran into some project management issues themselves, and it was kind of a very eye-opening experience. After that, I'll go into the 7 best practices for project management that we have learned over time and that have helped us to, or informed us on how we would design and how we should design our Unity solution. And following that, I'll give you a quick demo of Unity to show you how we applied those best practices. And lastly, we'll go into the key takeaways so that you can take these things home and apply them, hopefully, to your projects. So let's get started. Why is project management in this space so hard? If you can see this picture, you can see a little boat being chased by a big wave, and I love this image when I found it of the teeth on the wave, and it's kind of it's always a very difficult, fraught with all kinds of variables in these projects. And for me, projects are really like the perfect storm. There are so many things that collide together at once that you need to juggle just to stay afloat. And to prosper in them, you really need to use all of your wits, all of your tools, and all of your skills to do this. And there are 4 things in particular that I think, and we feel based on our experience, that need to be juggled and accounted for on a regular basis to enable handling these complex wireless network deployment projects. The first one actually is software. Software can refer to software that's used to actually design a network or to take measurements, but it also refers to software to run your projects. There's always going to be some type of software involved in this, and that means people have to be trained on how to use it. People have to be experts, and they have to leverage and get the most out of it, but not everyone is. But it's a major component nowadays in being able to run projects and being able to successfully design these networks that are so complex. The second one is hardware. One of the big differentiators between IT projects and the network wireless projects that are done in our space is that there are actual physical goods that have to be accounted for that are very varied in their performance. You were dealing with cables, with splitters, with repeaters, with racks, with servers, with all types of objects. And these may be from different manufacturers. They may be from preferred manufacturers. They may come with certain regulations attached to them. They may have to be procured at a different time because they're difficult to produce, or they may be produced in the millions. But the issue here is that there's a lot of inventory that has to be counted. There's a lot of actual things that have to be put together in order to make these network wireless projects a reality. And that's yet something else that has to be juggled. The third part is regulations. We all know, we all live with regulations in these industries. It could be EMF regulations, it could be building codes, it could be local fire regulations, it could be anything. But when we see, particularly in the public safety space, regulations are a part of work as much as any other thing. So that when we actually execute these, it's not just that we have to account for the software and the hardware, but how is this meant to be done? How far do things have to be apart? What type of fire protection do I need? What are the different things I have to think of for EMF, for example, or other things for that matter? So that's a third part that we have to juggle. And it's kind of independent of the two, but it's important to know. In fact, it's critical to know. And lastly, the fourth part, people. This I call the LPE. And LPE stands for the least predictable element. People are the least predictable part of this because I know what software is going to do. I have an idea of what the hardware is going to do. Regulations are relatively easy to deal with in the sense of they don't change every day, but people change all the time. You could be working with people who are experts who are juniors, with people who are from your area or very far remote. You could be working with people who have no clue and have come in because of the cost, or you could be working with people that are expensive but are absolute experts. And you could be working with people that are temperamental or not. You never know. And people with backgrounds, people with different specialities, and this is all very difficult to deal with on its own. And then mixed in with software, hardware, and regulations, this is the perfect storm that we're talking about. So let's get into, from the theoretical into the numbers. What I want to present to you in the next few slides are some of the results that came back from some interesting polls that were done and surveys that were done by Reiki and some other organizations that spoke about project numbers or project management numbers that went off the rails. And to give you an idea of what can happen when things aren't balanced properly and you're not using the right people, the right tools, the right products. There are three things here on this slide that I want to point out. In this study done by Reiki in 2015 of approximately 2,000 projects that were done, some were IT, some were hardware, and some were a mix of others. Of the people that responded, 45% said they went over budget, which I think is actually low. The reason why I think it's probably on the low side is that both small, medium, and large size projects were covered in this, and smaller projects tend to go over budget a little bit less than really large scale ones because they're less complex or they're shorter in duration, but still they go over budget equally as much as large scale projects. 7%, or they went over the plan time by 7%, which means that it was planned for 10 days, add 7% onto that, but it went much, much more. And I also think this is a very conservative estimate that a lot of people were not willing to come clean on. And the next series of numbers are actually probably going to bear this out. The last part here, 56% said less value was delivered than expected. That's really heartbreaking because the value in our space could be something as esoteric as quality of service. How do I perceive these things? It could be general KPIs that I have to meet in terms of EMS or in terms of how many negative dB, or it could be how many antennas do I have. It could be a lot of different things. But the fact is most people who are having these things put in realize they're not getting what they want, and is it because they set the wrong expectations, or the project's not done properly? It's important to get to the root cause of these things, but in general, there's some dissatisfaction there. The next numbers are kind of really scary when you get to the large size projects. In that same study, of the large-scale projects that were $1 million or higher, 1 in 6 of those had an average cost overrun of 200%. So think about what that is on a large-scale project when the cost overrun is that high. Have you really been able to budget for that amount? What are the kind of strategic issues that you're going to run into by not being able to actually fund these things? So this is a really shocking number, and it really is more attributable to the larger projects than it is to the smaller ones, which might be actually an indicator that instead of going for these mega large projects, we should break them down into small chunks that are more handleable and more negotiable in easier time and easier periods. But still, large-scale projects are expensive and they're hard to deal with. And as we can see from the results from the survey, they're expensive, and they're probably more expensive than they need to be. And the same thing happened with schedule here. The schedule overrun was by 70%. That's an incredible number. That's almost double. It's nearly 3/4 of the time of what it takes. And that means more people, more negotiating, more funds, more delays, and that's just a lot of headaches for everyone involved. And that probably contributes to not delivering the value that's expected. This last one came from HeadNet Mag, where they did a survey. And they found that only half, or just about half, of the architects that they interviewed had actually had a plan for in-building wireless. And that's really quite shocking nowadays when we consider that wireless is the fourth utility. We talk about water, we talk about heat, we talk about light or electricity. Yet the fact that these architects are not thinking of wireless as being as natural to have, as much a part of any structure, whether it be public or private, that it's not being considered is really quite shocking. It needs to be part of every single consideration all the time. And when we get into the case study, I'm going to point out a great example of this, how it wasn't taken into account. But knowing that architects don't seem to be on the same page all the time is a cause for concern. Let's go to the next one. Many of you might know of McKinsey & Company, a very storied and well-known research company with a great pedigree. They spent some time looking at about 1,700 plus projects in the IT and non-IT space that occurred over several years, and they tried to calculate what is the value of time lost, of extra money spent, of lost productivity for these 1,700 odd projects that they did. How did it affect it in terms of the revenue that was supposed to come in, how much money, extra money had to be spent, among other features, and they came up with an astounding figure. $66 billion is wasted due to poor project management on large-scale projects. And it's an astounding sum of money, $66 billion. And it's money that could have been spent elsewhere on different projects, on more important investments. Yet this is a result of the improper planning and not using the right tools and the right juggling for many complicated projects. And that's a shame because there's so much value that's not being captured. And when you consider how much $66 billion is, let me give you an idea. It's the gross country. I know Luxembourg is a small country, but still it's quite a wealthy country with many banks and wealthy investors. And when you think that you lose a country's worth of productivity, it really kind of shocks you, open your eyes open to see what's going on. So let's think about these numbers for a bit. When we talk about the project management, like there's some things that need to be done all the time, regardless of the project. So let's think about how we can advance things using better project management skills, better project management tools, how to juggle things better so that you can do the four things that every project in our space needs. We need to capture the time and the cost of projects as well as the project data. We also need to increase collaboration between people. I know that's spoken about a lot of let's collaborate, but we have to increase it between the different actors and the different roles, either through good communication skills or, more importantly, I think, through having the tools, the software tools to enable collaboration so that the right people have the right information at the right time. Also, you need to centralize your source of project information. So every project needs this kind of thing to have a central source of truth. And lastly, every project needs to be able to enhance the visibility that's the work in progress. It's difficult to keep on top of these things. You need to be able to see where you're going. And that is not an easy thing to do when you're juggling so many different things, like those four things that we talked about at the beginning: the software, the hardware, the regulations, and the people. So we've gotten to the point where we know that we have challenges, and we know that it's quite costly. So shouldn't we turn to different tools to do this? What are the tools that we could use to help us? The same way we use an iPhone or a Samsung to help us to get directions, to find out, where can I book the best dinner, or find out music, or any of these things. What are the different tools that are available to us to run projects more efficiently? And I'm sure you're saying to yourself, well, we always use tools. So it's simple. There's tons of solutions out there. Well, in this very, very same study that went on, the responses were really enlightening in a scary kind of way. Because of the tools that were used, the very first one was status reports. 70% of respondents said they use a status report. Now let's think about what a status report is. It's essentially someone answering an email or filling out a form or an online sheet to say, did I do this? Did you do it? What's it at? But it's a very static, not in-depth answer. And by using a status report, it's just a little picture in time that doesn't include the whole picture or the depth that you need in terms of information. It's a very binary kind of thing of, yes, we did it, or no, we didn't, or things are going fine or they're not, but there's no depth to it to look at it in a bigger picture. And when 70% of respondents say they use this, there's obviously a clear correlation between not using the right tools and being able to lose money very easily on these projects. The second one close behind was project plan documentation. Now you're saying to yourself, oh great, there's a project plan and it's in a document. But let's take a little closer look at this. A project plan is a great place to start, and having it documented is even better. But it isn't really a tool. A tool enables you to do certain things. It enables you to look at different facets, whereas a project plan tends to be something static. It could be created at the beginning of a project, and if it's in a document form, does someone actually go back to that document and change it and be agile with it and then circulate that back out to the group? Generally, the answer is no. A plan is usually set out at the beginning, and then it's only reacted upon and not amended and circulated to the people who need it. So project plan is a nice thing to have, but it's only one tiny part of it, and it isn't really a tool per se. It's more of an informational part. Number 3 was, and this breaks my heart, spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are everywhere. I've used them. Anyone on the phone has probably used them. They're great for accounting. They're great for keeping lists. And they're ubiquitous because so many people use Microsoft Outlook and Microsoft Excel, and they can share these documents, but it's not meant to be a project tool. Sure, you can do a pivot table, and you can share them, but it's the kind of thing where someone downloads it onto their computer, and then they forget about it, or they store it on a SharePoint, and then it gets left there. And a document like that can also be corrupted or lost, or can have certain things like it can't have the attachments that you need, like video or film or data or different kinds of data. So it's kind of static in its own right, but it's really heavily used. And it kind of breaks my heart to know that there are far better solutions out there than just spreadsheets. And of course, in fourth place, just over half of them use project management software. And when I see this, it kind of shows me that people do know that there are things out there, but are they using the right tools? Are they leveraging the tools that they have to the best advantage that they can, when only just over half are actually using them? Many use Microsoft Project, but that's only one facet. What about the collaboration aspects, and what about the storage aspects, and all different kinds of things? So if only half are using project management tools, the ability for a project to run off the rails is very, very likely and very high indeed. So we need to think about how we can use tools to make our lives better. They are not the solution. They are a contributor to help us juggle those 4 elements that we spoke of in the beginning: the software, the hardware, the regulations, and the people. So all that having been said, and I've scared you with a lot of numbers, let's get into some case studies. And there are 2 that I'd like to cover. The first one is what's known as the Montreal Super Hospital. For those of you that can see this photo, this is a very impressive structure on the face of it, and it was built because of demographic changes in the city of Montreal and in this province. The people are aging, and the government had long ago decided that it was necessary to have the health services be put together in a central place for maximum collaboration, maximum efficiency, and part of that was building this huge structure that could house many people. It took 3 hospitals that were in separate sites and put them into one large complex. It took over 4 years to build and 15 years of planning. Daily, there are about 12,000 staff and volunteers, and that's a small city in one location every day, and that doesn't include the thousands of patients that come and go or other healthcare staff that deliver people or move things along. And the scope of it, $2.3 billion of investment, was massive. And yet, despite all this 15-year planning, all this investment, all this forethought, when the switch went up and the doors opened, there were complaints ad nauseum about poor cell coverage, and it was throughout. What had happened was the people who designed the space said, well, we'll just put some exterior antennas and we'll blast from outside into the building and that should be fine. And only exterior antennas were considered for cell coverage, except in the building, it was not sufficient. And when you think about how things happen in day-to-day and what real-world needs are, the people who designed the space hadn't accounted for the new energy-efficient materials that actually tend to block signals more. They did not think that a hospital has multiple sub-basements to house equipment, generators, and the like. They did not think about the extra thick floors that were needed for heavy machinery such as MRI machines, X-ray machines, or other types of machines that are in there that can help, that would block the signal. And they didn't think of all of the different types of spaces that would be there, the type of interference that would come from outside as well. And they didn't think, most importantly, of the actual doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals who live on their mobile devices. Doctors and nurses now use their mobile devices to transmit information, to receive calls, to run to surgery, to gain access into files or x-rays that are sent by email. They're not just on desktop computers anymore, and they need to be mobile, yet the people who built this didn't take that into account, which is kind of shocking. And let's think of one other thing that's on top of this. When this building was being planned 15 years ago, the rate of data traffic wasn't anything like it is now, and even doctors and nurses take time to play on their phones, and think of all the patients that were there. And the patients would then sit there and wait for their medical procedures to happen, and their family members were there, and they'll be playing on their phones, playing games and downloading and whatnot. Huge amount of traffic that was only being served by exterior antennas. Well, it wasn't enough. More outdoors antennas wouldn't work. And when interviewed, the director of the hospital said, no, the only option we have is an indoor DAS system. And that comes with a hefty price tag, and it was in the millions of dollars. How much, you ask? $4.3 million. $4.3 million because the most essential now, along with water and electricity and heat, of utilities wasn't considered from the beginning. It's quite shocking, actually. And that should make us think about not just the software tools to make this, but also the people who are involved in the regulations as well. The second case study, The Right Tool, is a great little story that I found about a young project manager who was part of a consulting company that was working on an IT implementation project. And this guy said, you know what, I'm going to use a tool, which was quite commendable. He's going to use a Microsoft project. And he spent his days and his nights and his weekends building what he called a master project plan with tons of dependencies. Everything was linked. It was crystal clear. It was frozen. And then he went in one weekend to make one tweak, and it broke. By his own admission, all of those dependencies broke, and he had to spend so much time fixing all these dependencies, so much time, in fact, that it caused the project weeks of delay, and it caused cost overruns because they started late, they had to rush, they had to hire extra people. And the person who told this story was actually very mature about it when he said, I'm never going to depend too much on software again. And the lesson here is the danger of dependencies. And I don't only mean dependencies where things break in Microsoft Project or in any Gantt chart system. It's not just Microsoft Project. I'm not here to ding them. It's just too much dependency on one piece of software, or it's too much dependency on actually seeing how things look in a plan as opposed to being able to react in an agile fashion, having a central plan that you can share with other people and actually collaborate and share things. Sometimes it's just as important to be flexible and plan more and use software to help people get the information they need than it is to have a master plan. So from the large to the small, you can see that there are always projects that can go off the rail, and particularly for small companies, if you're that dependent on a piece of software, if you're a smaller SI, it could cost you a lot of money and time that you might not have that a really large company may have the luxury of doing, but you may not. So from those scary stories, I want to take you to our best practices. These are the 7 best practices that we've garnered over time. They came from experience that we've had from our customers, from our own listening to customers, things they've told us. And I hope that you will be able to avoid some of the most common errors when I get through these. And I'm sure you're going to have some of your own tips that you can pass along to me, and I'm always happy to hear them. So before I get into the actual practices, I want to go through one really small slide, this one that talks about process versus project management. You will hear the term project management, but very frequently it encompasses also process management. When we talk of processes, we're talking about workflows, tasks that are repeatable, or decision trees where I have to do one thing if and then statements. The process management aspect actually comes into the project management, but we shouldn't confuse the two. They each have different aspects and different tools to make them run. Project management, on the other hand, remember, is linear. There's a start date and an end date. There is a time box around it, which means task A should be finished by this date and then should trigger on to the next thing. So there is a sequential aspect to it, and it's important to remember that. And also remember that project management, we're talking about resources and budgets. So these are the things that we have to think about. It's not about the actual execution, but how do I set up the box around it, the framework to enable the execution. And what do both process management and project management have in common? People, the least predictable elements. You can't execute any of this without people, and some are good, some are not so good, some are fantastic, some are mediocre, but this is what you're stuck with when you're juggling all these 4 priorities of software, hardware, regulations, and people. So To our countdown. Number 1, our first best practice is store centrally in a structured database. Now, when I say store structurally in a centralized database, I do not mean a file server. Quite the opposite. A file server is not the solution. Using a Dropbox is not the solution. You need something like a content management system that will allow you to create folders, search on the information, store all types of media, and be able to share it very easily, as well as leverage that information to run reports on it and actually drive actions from it. Because over the course of time, you're going to gather movies, you're going to gather design files, mobile files, you're going to have data from testing. You'll have all types of information that you want to store, and that database that you have is going to grow. And that's good, because it's an asset. It's an asset for your company. But remember that it needs to be a structured asset. It can't just be a catch-all for everything. Because when it's a catch-all for everything, you spend too much time hunting for things. You need to have a structure to separate the different types of information and then run reports on them, because you can gain insight. And then you can probably trigger actions from that. So you're going to get a lot of central business benefits out of a centrally stored database that acts as a content management system. It reduces duplication so that you don't have to recreate things from scratch, be it project templates or PowerPoint templates or reports or anything of the like. It will help with collaboration and productivity, because you'll be able to share files from a central spot as opposed to looking for someone's email that they had on a server, or looking for that video that you took and spending time looking for that, because your productive time is wasted when you spend looking for things. And that helps productivity by being able to get things faster so you can complete things more quickly. Thirdly, it enhances traceability, because things do mess up. That does happen. And when you want to find the root cause and analyze what your best practices are, you want to be able to go back and look at the evidence that you had. What happened in a particular project? Did we have the right design? Did we have the right people? Was it planned properly? So where were the problems so that you can go back and look at things again? And that traceability leads to you having a knowledge repository. And the knowledge aspect of this is key, not just to say we have this as a business asset, but also to ramp up people who will start. For example, you're working with a new contractor, or you're working with someone who's fresh from a different organization, and you want to get them up to speed. Well, you can use your central repository, use the centrally structured database, to take out information and get someone up to speed quickly, because it's all there for them to leverage. So in addition to getting someone trained, you can also give them information from your central database to get them up and going quickly. You can also plan for future projects, because you can look at what you did in the past. How long did it take to do this complex project? Who did we need? Who was the expert? So use your existing resources to leverage it for the future so you can plan more accurately and allocate budgets better. And lastly, disaster recovery planning. In today's day, where we've seen weather events in the last 10 years magnify and escalate, you always want to have something as a backup. Whether you keep this on-premise or in the cloud is your choice, but make sure you have it centralized and copied somewhere else, because these are your business assets. This is actually intellectual property that you own. And if you are doing maintenance for another organization, for example, and they do have a disaster, if you're there to get them back up on their feet, because you can build, when they rebuild their location or whatever the case is, you can help them get online sooner and faster, because you have the designs. You know how the project was built. You know what needs to be done. And think about that from a societal value point of view. If, heaven forbid, an important building gets destroyed due to a fire or a flood, when it gets rebuilt, you have the information to get it built properly and faster the next time, so that the group of people who are affected are up and running more quickly. You're actually helping society by keeping your information centralized. The second one is more about the people side of it. Build a diamond. A diamond, as you know, when it's polished and nicely done, is worth a lot of money. Just ask anyone who's ever had an engagement ring before. This diamond, in this case, refers to 4 key roles having interaction with each other. What we recommend is to have, where possible, a connection and meetings between your RF engineer, a construction lead, an architect if possible, and if possible a building owner or someone who's got access to the particular site that you're working on. And we say this because very often not all of these people speak together at the same time. They tend to do it sequentially, and then it's broken telephone. But if at the start of your project you've identified these 4 people and you build that diamond, which kind of looks like a baseball diamond, If you've done that, you've enabled the people who are the key influencers to get together on a regular basis. Make sure they speak frequently, even if it's by phone or by Skype, or you can do it face-to-face. But make sure these people talk, because the building owner might have a concern that drives him or her, or the RF engineer might say, you haven't considered this. Or a construction lead might say, look, we have a delay with our the shipping of the product. Or an architect might say, no, you misinterpreted the way I wanted to do this. And as long as you have that communication, that's going to alleviate a lot of problems. And these 4 roles, this diamond, is key to getting that going and smoothly so that you have fewer problems down the road. And if they can't make it, make sure they have delegates to get that meeting. So build that into your project plan. Thirdly, in the process of the long road that is a network deployment project, you need to have a lot of checkpoints. And when I say checkpoints, I am not talking milestones. A milestone is a time on a calendar when you have to look back and say, did we do it, yes or no, and maybe a payment is dispersed or not dispersed. A checkpoint is different. The point here, if you may use that term, is to correct problems before they go forward. A checkpoint is to verify if things have been done properly. Not yes or no have they been completed, but was it done right? Because like interest, errors compound. My dad taught me that expression, saying, great, you put it in, but when things compound the wrong way, it's like building a house with a poor foundation. If I have a poor foundation and I put stuff on top of it that's even worse, I'm going to have a really bad long-term problem. So in your project, make sure you have checkpoints. Make sure that you have a checklist in the review and make it mandatory. What are the things that you have to verify? And in a network management project, it could be a lot of things. It could be the hardware, it could be the software, it could be the processes that you're using, and that's up to you to decide what you want to check. Was the walk test done properly? Did it account for everything? Do I have all the videos that I need? Did I do an optimization pass? Did it meet the KPI? Yes or no? So when you actually get to your milestones and you have to make payments, you know that you've done it right. So not only do you should check things, you should also set up reporting intervals. So as part of these checkpoints to decide who needs to know what info and how often. And one more tip, if you can, align with your accounts receivable and accounts payable. And I say this because in accounting, they love to know if, hey, oh my goodness, we have a payment coming up to a particular contract. That's good if we can do it, but what if you don't have the money ready? Or more importantly, what if you're owed a payment and the work that was done was poor quality? Do you want to pay to that point? So make sure your AR and AP say, hey, you know what? This isn't the right thing to do. We should make sure that if we have to do these things, that the work was done properly. Not just that it was completed, but it was done properly. So align closely with your AR, AP people, because they want to know what's going on and you want to keep control of the money that you've got. Number 4, know your regulations. We talked about regulations being one of those 4 jugglable elements. And regulations come and go, obviously, but they tend to be relatively static. There are all types of regulations across the globe. In fact, when I was doing research for this, I came across a great one from APEC on building standards across the globe, telling you about fire regulations, telling you about building codes, what's important, what things get checked, how are things looked on in different countries. As well, in the United States and Canada, you have different fire codes per municipality or per region, per state. It's very, very different, and you need to know what's going on. Likewise, EMF, another boiling topic that's been coming up again and again, and reports are often needed. Yet there are resources for that, as well as Bixby. But just knowing that you have your regulations is one thing. What we also recommend as a best practice, have a go-to person who is responsible for not only knowing these things or being the lead person, but also gathering the information. And that could be your RFE, could be your project lead, could be anybody. It's up to you to decide. But designate one go-to person who's your regulations guru. Because if things come back to bite you, you want to be able to point back to you followed the right code. So this is another kind of quality checkpoint if you want to look at it that way. Number 5, the people part. So when we talked about juggling software and hardware, sure, we know about that. We talked about juggling regulations, but now we have to talk about juggling people. A project and its project manager need to be in sync. The project manager needs to know that's the big prize. I've got to get this done because it's important to the company that I'm working for or on behalf of. But it's not the only thing. Just because you have a big picture thinker, or what you need is a big picture thinker to think of all the different aspects that go through this. You'll have execs that you have to report to. You'll have people in the field, techs, who need to know what's going on. You're going to have to be able to speak multiple languages. For this bigger picture person, this role, you need someone with a lot of people skills. Someone who can talk to the RFE as well and say, hey, this is what's going on, this is what I need. And of course, someone who can talk to accounting because they'll want to know what's going on with the money. Now, this might seem like an obvious thing, but in many times, so many project managers in this space focus too much only on the budget and the cost, saying, I hit the cost, I hit the target. But have you managed the people right? For example, your project is going to run into a problem because of a funding issue. Maybe you need to talk to the execs and say, we need more time. Or maybe the RFE says there's a critical error and we have to think about these things. Not only is project management about hitting your targets and your timelines, but it's about managing the human beings that are in them. And a project manager in this space needs to have those skills to do it. So when you think of all the different things, make sure it's someone who can think of the bigger picture and actually respond to these different audiences that they have. Sorry if I made fun of anyone in accounting, but that was the best thing I could come up with. Number 6, map parallel and sequential tasks. And if you can, use a workflow for sequential tasks. So parallel tasks are the things that you need to get done that are obviously beside each other in parallel. For example, you need to assemble your team. You need to have documentation ready. You might need to calibrate equipment. You might need to finalize vendors. But these are actions that can happen next to each other. And as a project manager, you might have to juggle these things at once. And you remember before we were talking about process versus project management. The parallel tasks are very much project management in this sense. But then when you actually get into, let's say, the design aspect, now you're getting into sequential tasks. And this becomes process management after a fact. It belongs to the project management, but it's its own beast that has to be executed in a certain way, in a certain time, and in a certain sequence for things to go off properly. Because, for example, in this case, you might want to order equipment only when the design is finalized, but you have to make sure that everything's been done properly beforehand. We recommend, where possible, use a workflow. If you have access to a workflow engine, great. We know not everyone has that, so if you can use Visio, you can also set up your workflow that way. But the great thing about a workflow engine is that it can trigger activities such as sending emails and notifications when things need to be done or when they're overdue. I realize this is a luxury for smaller places, but it doesn't have to be. There are lots of solutions out there, including Unity, that give you the option of having a workflow built in so that you can actually trigger things. And we're moving here from the planning aspect into the actual execution. And it's the execution where the rubber meets the road. So this is one key aspect. If you can do this, we really strongly recommend it. Lastly, we have plan for iterative loops. From final design to construction, we all know there will be changes. So sure, in a great world, you're going to finalize your design, you're going to hand it off to construction, and things get built and you're on to your next project. But we know in reality that's not what happens. There's going to be a question of, well, you know, the architect said this or that, or, well, no, that's not what we were going to do, or something's not built with the same equipment that we thought before, or, you know, those racks that you got, well, the room's a lot smaller, there's a riser in that room, or there needs to be ventilation. Well, now I've got to go back and change my design. What you can do to mitigate this somewhat is, we talked about that diamond before. If your engineer and architect, construction lead, and building owner are talking to each other on a regular basis, you should have fewer of these iterative loops. You should. I can't promise you anything, but to help mitigate these iterative loops that cost time and cost money and delay projects, you want to have that communication from the beginning. So plan for some comeback, if you will, these loops, but try and mitigate them by having the communication built in from the beginning. And more importantly, if you can't have that loop built in, because you can't always have access to an architect or a building owner, it just doesn't always exist. What you should do is plan to have your RF engineer and field techs available once you've submitted the final design, and have them on call, because if there are changes and the RFE has to make a significant change to the design, and for example, they're off to their next project where they're billing for new money or billing for a new project, suddenly you've lost that resource and you have to call them back in, and that's hard. What if you're working with a remote RFE and you have to get them this and they've started another project? So plan for that to make sure that you have access to an RFE who can say, you know what, I'll make the changes quickly and I'm available. And then the field tech's going to have to go out and do another walk to make sure that this all makes sense, do some more optimization. So make sure you have these people kind of in your back pocket. And it's kind of a bit of a buffer. I know we don't want to talk buffer. It should all be perfect, but we know it isn't. And then move from that into actually executing your project. So now, I'd like to take a few minutes and explain to you through a demo of Unity how we have incorporated these ideas into our solution. Let me just pop open the Unity instance that I have. And what I'm going to be showing you, ladies and gentlemen, is a solution that came about based on a lot of customer feedback that we got and on the need to be able to not just design well using iBwave Design and execute with iBwave Mobile, but to really drive things forward using a centralized collaboration platform, which is what Unity is. The way we have built this is around the concept of sites, because our network wireless deployment sites and projects are physical locations. And on those physical locations, we do projects. And we've laid it out such that the site information is the first thing that you see. And if you're a large company, or let's say you're a long-established company, you have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of sites that you've done over time, and you've populated your database, we have made it very easy for you to find the information. We have built in a kind of a search bar like Google that you have. If you're looking for one of your many, many projects, you can just type in a search term, and you'll get a response pretty quickly. And I can narrow down my choices, and I can drill into a project if I'd like. I can also save the search, which is kind of nice, because that way when I come in next time, I don't have to hunt around for it. And I can also get rid of the search. But that's only part of it. How we've laid out the information really came about from being able to find information simply, easily, and in a graphic fashion. We've given our users the chance to lay out the information as they like, and on the left, to build folder structures as they like, so they can see how they have their projects organized. One of the other things that we have beyond that, up here are reports, and I'll get into that in just a moment, as well as the workflow that we talked about before, because in our iBwave Unity team solution, we have a built-in workflow template, and it's also, the workflow engine is also available to the enterprise customers with dashboards and, more importantly, administration. I'll go into that in a moment. But from one particular view, you can find all your projects, and you can very simply just drill down. And I'll give you an example with the Denver Tower one. Here you can see a lot of your different information regarding this particular physical location. And if you want to, you can click on the address and you can pop it up in Google Maps. You can actually see where things are located. It's kind of a nice little perk that we put in there. So when you're looking for your information, you want to locate it, you can. Always a good feature to have. Furthermore, from this master data here on the left, we can see here that we have a project list with Denver Tower, and let's say we have the second project here called Wi-Fi Build-Out. I might have 6 or 7 projects here because this site is static, but the projects are always evolving. And from here I can see that I've got a design file, I've got a mobile file, and I have something called the iBwave Drive, which I'll go into in just a moment. The iBwave Drive is a great piece of information and a great source and utility for you. What we have done with this latest release of Unity and with Design, we've taken the time to build a file synchronization utility that's kind of like a Google Drive built into Design and Unity, so that files that are being done in Design, so if you're working on a design, let's say for Denver Airport, when you're finished that, you save it on your local drive on your PC, and at the same time, it will sync in the background up into Unity, so that the latest version is always available to someone centralized on Unity, making sure that you have a duplicate and making sure that it's a backup, and also being able to share it more easily from Unity. And I'll show you how that goes pretty quickly. But here you can see that we have all kinds of general information, and this has been extracted from the iBwave Design file automatically when it's parsed. There's different types of information info, all again pulled from your iBwave Design file, and it's also editable here in some cases. If you've applied a workflow, and in this case you can activate the workflow that's built in. You can also see your requirements that you have, or any technologies that you want, proposed technologies, and any other miscellaneous information that you might have. You can look at the revisions of your design file, and you know that the top one is the latest one you're working with. You can see your wireless services, who your operators and technology are. You can see the plans and buildings that have been pulled out of the design file. So if you want to see the floor plans, for example, or the design plan, or you want to know what the lat long is, you can actually see this information very, very quickly within Unity. And that's great for people who are working remotely and you will need to share with. Also really crucial is what we have is our iBwave drive, and this is where I want to show you a little bit more. Just a moment. I'm going to take us to another site really quickly. Hold on one second. There we go. So the iBwave drive is really, really simple, but a really great tool. And let me drill into a product here, or a project here. I'll show you what I like so much about it. Let's go into the Denver Tower here. And let me show you what you can do. And it seems kind of obvious and intuitive, but there are a lot of tools out there that haven't thought of this all the way through. When you're going into your iBwave drive, this is the sharing centralized repository that we talked about that helps you leverage your reports and your decisions, because the iBwave drive collects all the type of information you have here. You can store photos, you can store your design files, you can store mobile files, you can store Excel, PDFs, any type of file that you want can be stored here. And more importantly, if someone doesn't have access to this, they're not a user, you can still share this. So if someone is a user and has access to this, they're allowed to download any of these files if they want to. But if you're working with a contractor and you want to share it, you can share it very, very easily by clicking on it. You can see here I have the one file, and I could choose multiple files. Doesn't that could be 7 files if I want. I could set a password to protect it, and I can add a comment. And when I click share, what it will do is it will generate an email link using my native email client, and I can send that email off to any people I consider, who will then receive the link, not the file, but the link, so they can download it safely from outside. So you're covered in terms of protecting yourself with sharing information by only sharing it with those people that you need to. So I love that collaboration feature that we have built in. Another really important part are also the reports. We deliver 5 built-in reports with iBwave Unity, with the Unity team, and with Unity Enterprise we have more. We have approximately 10, and I want to go over some of these because it's important to know that when we're providing these kind of things, we're giving you information to analyze and to gain insight into what you're doing with your work. The reports are, there we go. The reports cover things such as active tasks or regional performance or project support technologies. And in iBwave Unity team, which is the latter one, we cover project cost details and some other information that is really, really critical to understand what's going on in your project. For example, we can look at a project design summary one, and from here, this is an enterprise version. When you go into a particular project, one of the great things about this and going into a particular report is that you can change the query conditions of your report quite easily, which will allow you then to garner different information and gain insight into what you've got going. The report aspect of it is really quite interesting from the point of view that you have the ability as a user to change that criteria and export it in multiple fashions. Of course, we're having a bit of a slow moment here with our system, but I don't want to take too much time on this. I'm going to open up another one really, really quickly. And I just want to show you the last thing before I go into the reports is the workflow. There we go. It never fails during a demo, right? What we have here, for example, let me go out with this into the projects. Here we have project cost details. And as we talked about these kind of projects before, you can get information very quickly by essentially changing the information that you have in your project. Well, you know what, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's going to take too much valuable time away from questions. I'd rather show you the administration features we have, because that's key for being able to report very quickly on and set up your administration. Just to give you an idea, you can see here the query conditions that are available and what a report looks like, and that you can export it to multiple formats. And when you change the query here, you'll be able to change the results in your table and format it as you like. The workflow is kind of interesting from the point of view of the execution that we spoke about. We can see here the different types of projects that you have, and I'm just going to open one up really quickly. The execution of the project, the process management, is also driven from iBwave Unity. And that means any types of tasks that you set up. So from here, for example, we have the ability to set these various tasks, set them as a milestone, see them in a Gantt view to see where the planned version is versus the actual version in the top right. And you can actually set the completion rate and start dates and end dates as well as the owners. You can also set up decisions from this point of view so that if something goes wrong, you can say reject it and go back. And this is the quality control that we were talking about. Lastly, there was the aspect of roles and folders and management. You have tremendous granularity over who can see what information. You're allowed to create different folders, and you'll also be allowed to create different roles. And these roles will have users assigned to them, for example, a project manager. You can assign multiple users to them, and you can allow certain roles to have access to certain applications, reports, general privileges, as well as what you want them to see in a particular folder. From here, I can say that a certain person with a certain role will have access to the main folder or the templates folder, and I'll be able to choose what it is I want them to be able to do. That gives me fine-grained control over who can access what, when, and who can see what reports, and even cost information, as you can see here, which is also can be either shown or suppressed. So having shown you all that, you can see that we have a lot of different things in Unity. You have the visuals of your actual sites. You have the reports that give you insight into what you're doing. You have the workflow management to actually execute on that. And most importantly, you have the administration to focus on how people can access the data, which people can access the data when. So let's go back to our key takeaways. So before you leave today, remember there are many, many elements to juggle. There's software, hardware, regulations, and people, the least predictable element. It's never easy, and it's the perfect storm each and every time, but you can navigate your storm better by using best practices and using the right software. Store your data centrally in a structured tool, not a file server. Use something that acts as a content management where you can share information, you can classify it by a folder type, you can classify it and search for it. This is a business asset that's yours, it's intellectual property. Thirdly, build that diamond. Manage the strategy and the stakeholders. Make sure that these key roles, where possible, are talking to each other regularly, and make sure that your stakeholders are properly managed so that the people part of that perfect storm is as well managed as could be and understand the value of that project. Remember to have frequent checkpoints. Don't let errors compound. Control for quality long term. Have a checklist ready and make sure that you're not micromanaging, but you're ensuring that quality is built in as you go along. And remember, these aren't milestones. These are checkpoints for quality. Make sure the foundation is good from the start, and you'll have fewer headaches down the road. Lastly, when you're dealing with parallel and sequential tasks, map them out, and if you can, with your sequential tasks, try and employ a workflow strategy, and if you can, even better, a workflow engine that will trigger notifications, emails, and keep people going and honest, and will let those stakeholders that have to know what they have to do actually get going on their case. So I hope these last 5 takeaways were really enlightening for you. I hope you've learned a lot, and if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them now in the time that we have remaining. Amna, do we have any questions?
Thank you, John. Yes. So the first question I have is, how does iBwave Design and iBwave Mobile work with Unity?
Great question. We know that some of our listeners have iBwave Design and Mobile already, and where does Unity come into this? So you view Unity as the platform through which you share and extract information from mobile and from design. So, for example, you're using design to do these things, but if you're looking at the whole project, think of it from a structured workflow point of view of step 1 is I might have my tech go to the field and use iBwave Mobile to take preliminary walk test readings, and I could save that to Unity. And then the first part of that survey is done, and that information can then be taken from Unity and either downloaded or sent to an RFE who would then open it in iBwave Design. They don't have to look for anything. If they have access to iBwave Unity, they just pull it down, or they can have it mailed to them, either way. And then in iBwave Design, the design can take place through iterations, and it can be shared and uploaded and synchronized to Unity. And when that's completed, when it's finalized, it could then be shared to someone outside of the project, let's say a construction manager who wants to have a look at the design, this is the as-built, and that can be just mailed along. Furthermore, when the things get built, we can also then have the person who's in the field who has iBwave Mobile to go and have a look and test things out against the KPI to see if the design actually matches the real world needs that are there. So it's not even so much the tools as the coalescence of these tools, the information gets parsed out of iBwave Design and put into Unity, and that you have the central storage of the information to share. So it all works together as part of a whole platform.
Thank you, John. So we have one more question. If I don't have design, is it still possible to use Unity for other projects?
Yes, you can use Unity for other projects. The maximum benefit you will get is if you do have iBwave Design because of the file parsing, but by no means are you limited. You can store any type of file, as we said before. So if you want to upload videos or even iBwave Mobile or PDFs or any other type of file, you can upload it there and you can share it through iBwave Unity, whether it's iBwave Unity Team or Enterprise. It is a collaboration platform in that respect, and it will really help you centralize all your information. So you are not forced by any means to have it, but you'll get even more value out of it if you do have design. But you're not excluded at all.
So I have one more question. Does Unity work with the new Wi-Fi software?
It works like mobile in that you can save information to Unity. So if you have access to the Unity server, you can save your information there. The file can also be uploaded to Unity, so it does work in that respect, and you can create projects as well through Unity and run them that way.
Thank you, John. So this is all the time we had for the questions today. I would like to thank everyone for attending and just remind you that you will be getting the slides and recording of this webinar within the next few days. If you think of any other questions or if you have any comments, please feel free to reach out to us. And once again, we thank you for your attendance and have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.